So, I'm interviewing my grandmother for the U.S. history oral presentation. So, if we can start, so the Vietnam War started in 1950 and it continued to 1975.
Right.
How did that impact or affect your life growing up?
Well, I was born in 1949, so the early years of the war didn't affect me at all. When I got into high school, there were several of the boys that were in my class and stuff that went to Vietnam. And friends of my, later on when I got married, friends of my husband had gone to Vietnam. So, you know, it was a scary thing because a lot of them didn't come home, you know. And so that was probably my generation's first impact by a war.
Okay, and then as presidents, as time went on, the "I Have a Dream" speech happened in the same year that JFK got assassinated.
Yes, exactly.
How did any of that affect you?
Well, you know, to this day, I know exactly where I was when JFK got assassinated. I was in my freshman English class on the third floor of what they called the White Building at Woodstock Academy, where I went to high school, and everything immediately stopped. All classes stopped. We just sat, we chatted. My history teacher sat there and cried. He liked President
JFK.
Yes, he likes JFK very, very much, and he cried when that happened. And it was shocking because we'd never witnessed anything like that, you know, before. So it was quite shocking to us. And I was a freshman, so I was like 14 years old, you know.
And then about the "I Have a Dream" speeches.
That was interesting because, of course, in my small town, we had one African-American family. That was it. So we, as a town, really had never encountered any difficulties for that black family being in our town. They were accepted. They played baseball with the kids. They, we had them in 4-H. They were just accepted, and so we didn't really live in a community that was heavily populated by African Americans that were having difficulty, you know. So it was kind of odd for us, but I totally agreed with it. I thought they should have the same rights as everyone else, and in our town they did, you know. So it was that was probably the main thing that I would think about with that.
And then after JFK got assassinated, Lyndon B. Johnson came into presidency and he created the Great Society. Did that have any impact as well? Or was it in your high school life and it really didn't have much?
Yeah, it really didn't impact us very much, I have to say. And then I got married the year after I graduated. So, you know, it didn't really affect me, I don't think.
Okay. And then with Nixon as well, after you got out of high school, did you agree with any of Nixon's? Did you agree with Nixon as a president?
No.
Okay.
No. And you know, when Watergate happened, you know, that was shocking to us too, because we hadn't had a president that did that kind of thing and then had to leave office and, you know, so forth. I still remember him getting on the plane and saluting. That was, we watched it on TV, you know, basically as it was happening, you know. So, but yeah, I thought, you know, with what had happened and so forth, that he should be, you know, leaving office, because it made sense to me anyway in my young life, you know.
And then, as well, so we got on, and after Nixon, there was conflict in Iraq. Would you have any? Did that have any impact or effect on your life? And did you agree with it?
Well, I guess to some extent we were afraid that it was going to turn out to be another Vietnam.
Yes.
Which we lost an awful lot of guys that I knew and cared about and didn't really accomplish much by doing that war at all. It just seemed pretty senseless to me. And so I think a lot of us were afraid that it was going to be the same type of situation where we go in and, fight and lose people and then not accomplish anything, and it went on forever. My son, your father, of course, flew helicopters in the first Gulf War, which was very scary for me, to be a mother and have my son involved in that kind of a situation. And then the ship that he was on, he was in port, and the ship that he was on got fired upon. And we didn't know what had happened. We didn't know if it had actually hit the ship or if anybody got injured or if anybody, and so we were trying to find out information about that, and that was a scary time too, But as it turned out okay. So that was frightening, but okay, so, but we send our young people to do battle, and it just, if you don't accomplish anything with what you're doing, it's, why do it? I guess that's my question, but I don't know if we can say we accomplished that much with that war either, the Gulf War. So I guess we did get rid of Osama bin Laden, which was a good thing, and but I'm sure that there were others that stepped up to take his place.
And as well, were you very happy with the end of Vietnam's war when that came around?
Well, I think we were happy that it finally ended, and that our guys didn't have to go anymore. But we were all very disappointed that it hadn't really accomplished anything, And my husband, which would be your your grandfather. He had a friend that went over, and he worked with the Medic Corps. And, they had a big tent and everything that had a Red Cross on it so that it wouldn't be bombed, hopefully, because it was injured people, and, but yet he could stand outside his tent and watch the Viet Cong march by and couldn't do a thing about it, because if he drew fire, then they were going to fire back, So I think that really, to some extent, he had some PTSD when he came home, so.
And how did that affect your home life with the PTSD?
Well, my husband didn't go into the war, so I personally didn't have. I had a couple of brother-in-laws that were in the military, but they were out by the time Vietnam started, and so I really didn't have a family member. It was mostly high school friends and so forth that went. Some of which came home, some of which didn't, But as far as family goes, we didn't actually have anyone that went and fought, So it didn't really affect my personal life that much,
Okay.
I think we were all glad when it ended, certainly, because we knew it hadn't accomplished anything, and it was, just shouldn't have started it to begin with.
Okay.
But.
And then we passed the. The Space Shuttle Challenger. That rised up and it
And exploded.
Did that have any effect on your life as well?
Not personally, but it was again another shocking incident. You know, we felt really bad about the astronauts that were on there that had worked so hard for so many years. You know, between their college classes and then their training to be astronauts and everything else, and then have that happen before they even got a chance to really get up there and use any of that knowledge. You know, so that was very sad.
And then
We saw that on TV too because we always watched the launches.
Yes.
You know, so
And that was one of the big devastating losses.
absolutely.
And then, as well as we heard with President Bush, we heard the breakup of the Soviet Union. Obviously, that probably had effect growing up with the Red Scare and everything.
Yeah.
How did all of that affect your life?
But you know, it's funny. We had to train, quote unquote, when we were kids, so that if there was a nuclear war, we would get under our desks. Now, of course, looking back on it now, that was pretty silly because that wasn't going to help anything. But that's we had to do drills where we got the call in, and then we had to get under the desk and prepare. Which, like I said, was all pretty silly because it would have killed us anyway if it had hit directly. So, but.
Were you excited with or were you happy with the breakup of the Soviet Union, since some of that might have caused fear or stuff in your life?
Yeah, I mean, some of the people that were in charge, they were a lot different, certainly, than Stalin was back in the day. But now you've got somebody an awful lot like Stalin that's back in power, Putin, and it's difficult. I mean, like, he just declared war on the Ukraine, which he never should have done. And he's talked about going after Finland, but now Finland joined NATO, so they will be protected by NATO. That's part of the membership rules, That's the one thing the Ukraine doesn't have behind them, but they have been given by friendly nations. They have been given a lot of arms and missiles and tanks and all of that kind of stuff, equipment, which I think surprised Russia because Ukraine's doing a whole lot better than Russia ever anticipated. So I would not be surprised if they get out of there soon, but you don't know. He's a little strange, so.
Yes. And now leading up to one of the most tragic events in U.S. history, how did 9/11?
Yeah. Well, I think I mentioned earlier today that my sister and brother-in-law and I were on a vacation trip, and we were out for 16 days, 10 days in Italy and 6 days in Greece. And we came home through Paris, and we flew in on September 10th, the day before that happened. Now, had it been a day later, they would have diverted us to Canada, and we wouldn't have gotten home for quite a while. And, I mean, that was just totally shocking. I don't think we expected it because, we do have a large military force and very well-equipped military force, and we, in our heads somewhere said, well, nobody's going to attack us, that's crazy, so, but they did, and it was very sad, very sad. I was sitting at work. I know exactly where I was sitting. That's another day that I knew where I was, to this day, and we were crying. It was very, very tough to deal with. Because my mother grew up in New York City. That's where she was born and brought up, her and her sister and brother. And so, we used to go and visit my grandparents there and my aunt and uncle and stuff. And, we could have been in that city, it made you think about should we really go to this place? Is it possible that this place could get bombed next or whatever? It made you think a little bit more.
And the Pentagon bombings as well.
Yes.
My father was in
That's correct.
the Pentagon when that happened.
Right.
How did that happen?
Well, that was scary, certainly, but then your father had to get into a helicopter
Yes.
and fly all around New York City, making sure that nothing else was coming at them. And he flew for hours and hours in the seat of that plane, helicopter. And that was scary because, as a mother, is somebody else going to attack? Are they going to come back and do more, and is Bill going to be involved? So between him being in the Pentagon and then having to patrol New York City, it was frightening, no doubt about it.
Okay, and then if we talk about modern day stuff, we also have, modern day, you brought up the Russia invading Ukraine. And
right.
How do you feel like U.S. has dealt with that? How do you think?
Well, I think we've certainly sent them a lot of military aid, and we spent a lot of money. There's no doubt about it. I mean, I think they're up in the billions as far as equipment and financing and stuff. What makes me really sad about that war is that Ukraine had such beautiful infrastructure, old churches and old castles and old houses that the government was in and everything, and they're all destroyed now, and you can't ever get that back. I mean, yeah, you can rebuild, but it's not that building that was built 200 years ago, and they had beautiful stuff, and it just, now they show on TV all the buildings that are just half there now. They're not even whole anymore, and they're just destroyed, and that makes me sad because I'm a history buff. I love history, so I love to see those old places. Like coming here, where your father took me all over today. It was just nice to see stuff that was that old that still survived.
And if I have if I've skipped over any of our other topics, did anything else during your life impact you?
Well, I had an uncle that was in World War II, and he was a prisoner of war, and that was very frightening. That was my mother's sister's husband, and they had 4 kids, and of course my mom and dad had three of us, and so they came and visited us, and we went and visited them, and for him to be a prisoner of war was really, really tough. He was on one of those marches in the snow that had, they had no food, their shoes were falling apart, and they had to march for miles and miles and miles to change location of the camp that they were in, because in their mind the enemy was getting too close, And then the day that the Russian forces got close enough that Germany decided they needed to just bug out, and they left all the prisoners there with no food, no anything, and just ran. And I hope this isn't you can leave this out if you don't think it's appropriate, but my uncle and another man left the camp to go and try and find food because everybody was so hungry. And they got to this farm, and the only person that was there managing the farm was a woman, because all the men, of course, were off fighting. And they asked her for food, and she refused to give it to them. And so my uncle stabbed her with a knife. And then they took a whole bunch of food and went back to the camp and fed people until their rescuers got there and could help them. And of course, he came home with horrible PTSD. But of course, it wasn't identified back then. Nobody said, oh, that's PTSD. It's just, but he would put on his uniform, march down the streets in New York and yell at the Germans and have his gun. And the police were nice enough, they didn't arrest him or anything, they just brought him home because they knew he was a soldier and was having difficulties, you know. But it took him a long time to be able to relax a little and really live a fairly normal life, you know. But he had that knife all his life until the day he died. He kept that knife. So.
That is pretty tragic.
Yeah. But he did what he had to do in order to try and help his fellow man there, all the prisoners that were there starving, you know, so.
Any other events or stories?
Well, my grandfather was 15 years old in Germany when he stowed away on a ship and came to the United States. So he didn't have any papers. He was what they call an illegal alien, which they didn't identify again back then. But he had no papers or anything. The story was that he left home because they had a farm and he was raising this cow that was like his pet. And his dad decided it was time to butcher him. Mm-hmm. And so my grandfather at 15 was very upset about that, and so he just didn't tell anybody. He just left home and got on a ship and went over to America. Mm-hmm. And he became a butcher and lived in New York until the day he died, you know, just about. I mean, we brought him to Connecticut when him and my grandmother, when they were really old, so that my mother and father could help him out and stuff. But yeah, they lived in New York City for a long time. So, my mother lived in New York City as a child and so forth. And then when she got married and moved to Connecticut, we were in a very small town called Eastford. And the house that she came to, that my father had, and my grandmother lived there too, had no electricity, no running water. So she came out of a city that was lit up like, you know, crazy and stuff, and had all the modern conveniences, and went to a small farmhouse that had no conveniences, you know. So my father eventually put in a hand pump in the kitchen for water, and then he built he put in electricity. He built his own generator.
Oh, wow.
To make electricity for like a refrigerator or something like that, because other than that they couldn't. And another fact is that my father, your great grandfather, mm-hmm. Was one of the first students up in Michigan, because that's where my Finnish ancestors came in from Finland into Canada, and then they came into Michigan. And my grandfather worked in the copper mines and eventually died of black lung. But my father, as a teenager, was one of the first students in the Henry Ford Trade School.
Oh, wow.
Henry Ford developed a trade school, and he became one of the students there.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, is that all?
Oh, there's tons and tons and tons of stories. I could keep going for hours, you know, but those I would think would be the main things, you know, that both my grandmothers came in. One came in from Germany, one came in from Finland, mm-hmm. and they both were what they called sponsored. Mm-hmm. So my grandmother from Germany was sponsored by a family, and she had to work for that family while she paid off her passage. They paid for her passage to come to the United States. And then for a number of years, she had to work practically free, you know, mm-hmm. And take care of the kids and take care of the house and all that. My grandmother from Finland came into Michigan, and she worked at a boarding house. They sponsored her to come in, and she had to work for quite a few years cleaning and cooking and stuff at the boarding house.
Okay.
So that was how they made it in. But, you know, they were 15 when they came too, And of course, to be 15, to be sponsored by a family you've never known, to go to a country, a language you didn't know, at 15 years old, and know that you had to work for a number of years to pay off your passage. I mean, they were pretty brave, that generation. They were really pretty brave.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
This was a great time. And
Yeah.
I had a lovely time learning more about this.
Great. Yeah, that's your family too, so
Yes.
yes.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome.